Imagine waking up every day already exhausted, not from work, not from effort, but from people. Conversations that drain you, words that sting long after they are spoken, relationships that feel like invisible chains wrapped around your thoughts, your confidence, your peace. You try to be patient. You try to understand. You tell yourself it is not that bad. But deep down you know something is wrong. Very wrong. This audiobook is not about fixing toxic people. It is about saving yourself. It is about recognizing the silent patterns that slowly erase who you are, learning why certain people thrive on control, guilt, and emotional chaos, and discovering how to protect your mind without becoming cold or cruel. You will hear stories that feel uncomfortably familiar, moments that make you pause and think, "This is my life." You will understand how manipulation really works, why walking away feels harder than staying, and how reclaiming your boundaries can feel terrifying at first, yet liberating beyond measure. This is not a motivational speech full of empty positivity. This is a survival guide for anyone who has ever felt smaller around someone else. Stay with this video until the end, because what you are about to learn may change how you see people forever, and more importantly, how you finally choose yourself. Chapter 1. The Silent Weight of Toxic Influence. The first chapter opens by inviting the listener to notice something subtle yet deeply familiar, the quiet exhaustion that comes from being around certain people. Not physical tiredness, not the kind that sleep can fix, but a mental and emotional heaviness that settles in after conversations, messages, or even brief encounters. The book frames this feeling as a signal, not a weakness. It suggests that before anyone learns how to deal with toxic people, they must first understand how toxicity feels inside the body and mind. Many people live with this pressure for years without naming it, assuming it is normal, assuming the problem is their own sensitivity, their own inability to cope. This chapter gently but firmly challenges that belief. It explains that toxic people rarely appear dangerous at first. They do not announce themselves. They blend into families, friendships, workplaces, and romantic relationships. They may even seem charming, supportive, or wounded in a way that triggers empathy. The danger lies not in obvious cruelty, but in patterns that slowly distort reality. The chapter describes how toxicity often begins with small moments, subtle dismissals, jokes that cut just a little too deep, comments that make you doubt your memory, your feelings, or your worth. Over time, these moments accumulate, creating a sense of confusion and self-blame. The author emphasizes that the core of toxic influence is not anger or conflict, but control. Control over emotions, reactions, time, and identity. Toxic people often seek power not through force, but through emotional leverage. They may use guilt to keep others close, fear to maintain authority, or unpredictability to keep people constantly alert and off balance. The chapter explains how this creates a survival state in the person exposed to it, where they are always anticipating the next mood shift, the next criticism, the next emotional withdrawal. Living this way slowly erodes confidence and clarity. A powerful idea introduced in this chapter is that toxicity is not about occasional bad behavior. Everyone has difficult moments. Toxicity is about consistency. It is about repeated patterns that leave one person diminished while the other feels reinforced. The book describes how many readers will recognize themselves as the ones constantly adjusting, apologizing, explaining, and compromising, while the toxic individual rarely reflects or takes responsibility. This imbalance becomes normalized, and the person enduring it begins to believe that love, loyalty, or professionalism requires self-sacrifice at any cost. The chapter also explores why it is so hard to see toxicity while you are inside it. Emotional attachment plays a major role. When someone has invested time, love, history, or shared identity into a relationship, the mind resists information that threatens that bond. The author explains how the brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. Staying feels safer than leaving, even when staying hurts. This is not weakness, it is human psychology. Understanding this helps remove shame from the experience and replaces it with clarity. Another key theme in this chapter is the loss of self. The book describes how prolonged exposure to toxic dynamics leads people to disconnect from their own needs and instincts. They stop asking what they feel and start asking what will keep the peace. Their inner voice becomes quieter, replaced by constant monitoring of someone else's reactions. Over time, they may forget who they were before the relationship began. The chapter treats this not as a failure, but as a consequence of adaptation. The mind adapts to survive, even if survival comes at the cost of authenticity. The author also addresses a common myth, that toxic people are always aware of what they are doing. Some are intentional, some are deeply unconscious, repeating behaviors they learned long ago. But the chapter makes a crucial distinction. Intent does not erase impact. Whether the harm is deliberate or accidental, the effect on the recipient is the same. Pain does not require permission to be valid. This idea helps readers stop excusing behavior simply because the other person had a difficult past or did not mean to hurt them. As the chapter progresses, it shifts from recognition to responsibility. Not responsibility for the toxic behavior, but responsibility for one's own well-being. The book is careful here, emphasizing that recognizing toxicity is not about blaming or attacking others. It is about reclaiming the right to emotional safety. The chapter introduces the idea that awareness is the first act of self-respect. You cannot change what you refuse to name, and you cannot protect yourself from what you deny. The chapter closes with a grounding message. Healing does not begin with confrontation or dramatic exits. It begins with observation, paying attention to how interactions make you feel, noticing patterns instead of isolated incidents, trusting discomfort as information rather than something to suppress. The author reassures the reader that feeling unsettled while listening to this chapter is not a bad sign. It is a sign that something inside is waking up. By the end of the first chapter, the listener understands one essential truth. Toxic relationships do not just affect moods, they reshape identity. And the journey ahead is not about changing others, but about slowly, patiently finding your way back to yourself. Chapter 2. Recognizing Toxic Patterns. How to see the behavior before it sees you. Toxic relationships rarely explode into view. Most of the time they arrive like a slow leak in the foundation, small, almost invisible, then suddenly structural. This chapter teaches you how to spot the pattern systemically, to name repeating dynamics, and to translate gut discomfort into clear signals you can act on. You will learn concrete markers of toxicity, the common personality strategies that create harm, and a practical mapping exercise you can use to understand any relationship. Start with the internal signals. Your body knows before your mind does. Fatigue after seeing someone, replaying conversations at night, apologizing without remembering what you did wrong. Those physical and emotional reactions are data. They are not signs of weakness. They are the nervous system's early warning system. Learn to recognize these as valid clues. Keep a simple log for 2 weeks. After each interaction, write one sentence about how you felt, one about what changed in your behavior, and one small objective fact you noticed. That log turns vague feelings into patterns. Next, watch for behavioral loops. Toxic people use a few reliable strategies to control outcomes. One is the cycle of charm and teardown, dazzling praise, then small criticisms that chip at confidence. Another is unpredictability, inconsistent responses that keep you off balance and hypervigilant. A third is entitlement dressed as need, demands framed as "help me," that, when refused, become accusations or withdrawal. Recognize the bills. If someone alternates between affection and withdrawal as a means to shape your choices, that is not passion. It is leverage. Gaslighting deserves its own attention. It's not a metaphor. Gaslighting is a systematic effort to make you doubt your perception. It starts small. You're remembering that wrong, or you're overreacting. Over time, those comments accumulate and change your internal memory bank. Counter this by writing facts down in real time. Save messages, take notes, use calendar timestamps. Objective records create a tether to reality that emotional pressure cannot easily sever. When you feel brushed aside, consult your record first, not your anxious mind. Personality prototypes matter because they predict strategy. Narcissistic patterns are about entitlement and image management. The person must appear right or superior. Passive-aggressive patterns hide resentment behind forgetfulness or jokes. The perpetual victim frames need as helplessness and weaponizes guilt. The controller micromanages. Identifying the pattern helps you anticipate tactics and design responses that limit harm. That does not require you to diagnose clinically. It requires observation and categorization for your own safety. Observe escalation triggers. Toxic dynamics often follow consistent triggers: criticism, boundary setting, public embarrassment, or the person perceiving loss of control. When you touch a sensitive button, note the sequence: the immediate reaction, the escalation, and the aftermath. Does disagreement lead to silent punishments for days? Does asking for a simple favor turn into a dramatic moral lecture? Patterns create predictability, and predictability is a tool. If you know the likely series, you can remove yourself from the path before it unfolds. A practical mapping exercise. Draw a 3-column chart. Column 1, recurring behaviors from the other person. Column 2, how you typically respond. Column 3, the consequences: emotional, practical, relational. After a week, you'll see concrete exchanges that cost you energy. That clarity removes guilt and amnesia. It becomes easier to plan incremental changes because you can see the cost-benefit of each interaction. Language is a weapon and a shield. Toxic communicators rely on ambiguous phrases to shift blame. "I was only joking. I didn't say that. You're too sensitive." Train yourself to ask clarifying questions and to restate. Say, "I heard you say X. Do you mean Y?" This refuses the fuzzy ground where manipulation grows. Calm restatements create boundaries of meaning. When someone refuses clarity repeatedly, that refusal itself is informative. Social triangulation is another common tactic. A toxic person will draw in others to validate their version of events or to isolate you. Notice if narratives about you are circulated without your presence. That's signal, not drama. Respond by communicating directly with people you trust, maintaining your own recorded facts, and refusing to enter into defensive public debates. Smaller audiences and one-on-one clarifications deny them the spectacle they seek. Finally, set a reality test for your relationships. Ask yourself 3 questions periodically. Does this relationship elevate me or drain me? Do I feel like my voice matters here? Am I chronically explaining myself or chronically apologizing? If the answers trend negative and your log confirms it, consider the next chapter's toolkit: boundary scripts, gradual distancing, and support planning. Recognition is not the same as action, but it is the necessary first move. Once you can see the pattern clearly, you can change your position in it. Chapter 3. Boundaries, Scripts, and Survival Techniques. Practical tools to protect yourself. Now that you can spot toxic dynamics, this chapter gives you the practical tools to respond. Measurable, repeatable strategies that preserve your energy, protect your autonomy, and keep options open. We cover boundaries that work, language you can use in the moment, workplace adjustments, and how to create a safety net if you must exit. Boundaries are not walls. They are rules for how your life is treated. They come in three forms: emotional, temporal, and material. Emotional boundaries define what conversations you will engage in and what behaviors you will not accept. Temporal boundaries set availability, hours you are not reachable, or meetings you will not attend without a certain agenda. Material boundaries concern money, possessions, and physical space. Decide explicitly what each boundary looks like in your life. Write it as an instruction, not a negotiation. "I do not discuss my mental health with coworkers" is clearer than "I'd rather not talk about that." Scripts are your verbal armor. Craft short, unemotional phrases that reflect the boundary and require no justification. Examples: "I can't do that right now." "I won't discuss this while I'm driving." "I'll respond when I'm collected." Rehearse them until they sound normal coming from you. When a toxic person pushes, repeat the script calmly. If they escalate, keep it short and leave. The power of scripts is twofold. They reduce your cognitive burden in high-emotion moments, and they reveal the other person's options. If they respect your script, the relationship has a path forward. If they disregard it, they reveal their priorities. The gray rock method is a useful technique for interactors who cannot be avoided. It means becoming boring, withholding emotional reactions, offering minimal responses, and not feeding drama. Use neutral topics and non-committal replies. This denies the manipulator the charged responses they rely on. Gray rock is not a long-term solution for intimacy, but it prevents emotional drain while you build other exits. Documentation is essential. In workplace contexts, email trails and written summaries are your best friends. After significant conversations, send a polite follow-up email summarizing the agreed points. Who will do what by when? This creates an objective record and prevents the "that never happened" dynamics. For personal relationships, keep a private log of incidents and dates. That log is for you, a map of patterns and a resource if you later need to justify decisions to others or professionals. When safety is at risk, emotional, financial, or physical, create a plan. Identify safe locations, trusted contacts, and accessible funds. If you are in an abusive situation, know the numbers for local shelters, hotlines, and legal aid. Small preparations, a packed bag, a duplicate key hidden with a friend, a few emergency dollars, can be decisive when a crisis occurs. Don't wait for catastrophe to plan. Workplace toxicity requires additional structure. Chapter 4. Healing the nervous system. Trauma-informed recovery strategies. When you wake up in the morning and feel tightness in your chest before any email arrives, when a single text message can throw your day into disarray, or when your body reacts to a tone of voice, the way it would to a physical threat, your nervous system is speaking. This chapter is not a lecture about resilience. It is a practical manual for repairing the nervous architecture that long-term exposure to toxicity slowly frays. Toxic relationships do three primary things to the nervous system. They keep it in a chronic state of hypervigilance. They blunt healthy signals so pleasure and safety are harder to access, and they create conditioned responses that hijack decision-making. Healing begins in the body and moves toward cognition, not the other way around. First, recognize the signals without shame. Shame tells you that reacting is a personal failure. Insight tells you those reactions are adaptive responses learned in an unsafe environment. When your body tightens, that was once a life-saving mechanism. Now it is misfiring. Reframing biology as history reduces self-blame and opens a practical pathway. The next step is to create predictable micro-routines that reset baseline arousal. Rhythm is medicine for a nervous system that expects chaos. Start with breath. 12 slow diaphragmatic breaths in 3 slow counts in, 5 counts out, calms the vagal tone and reduces immediate panic. Do this before responding to charged messages or stepping into difficult conversations. It is not spiritual fluff. Controlled breathing changes neurotransmitters and improves cognitive clarity in minutes. Grounding practices anchor you in the present and interrupt looping anxiety. Sensory grounding is simple. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste. Do this for 30 seconds during sudden stress. The method communicates to your brain that you are not actually in a life or death scenario, enabling higher order thinking to return. Movement is another non-negotiable. The nervous system recycles adrenaline with motion, whether that is a brisk 10-minute walk, a short set of push-ups, or swinging your arms for a minute. This physical discharge reduces the energy available for rumination and lowers reactivity. Sleep hygiene repairs vulnerability. Chronic poor sleep amplifies sensitivity and reduces cognitive resources needed to refuse manipulation. Create a sleep ritual, consistent wake time, dim lights an hour before bed, device-free bedroom, and an evening ritual that signals safety to the nervous system, such as reading a neutral book or a warm shower. Even small improvements in sleep quality compound and make boundary enforcement easier because your decision fatigue decreases. Somatic practices help reclaim the body from the relational history stored there. Somatic experiencing, gentle trauma release exercises, and progressive muscle relaxation teach you to notice tension patterns and release them intentionally. Learn to scan the body and track where anxiety sits. Is it a clenched jaw, tight shoulders, or a hollow gut? When you locate it, breathe into it and allow a small voluntary softening repeated practice interrupts automatic contraction over time. Yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong are slow movement modalities that reconnect breath, posture, and interoception. They are less about flexibility and more about teaching your nervous system a new vocabulary of safety. Therapy is an essential structural support. A trauma-informed therapist helps you map responses to triggers and builds a phase-based plan: stabilization, regulation, processing, and integration. At first, you might spend months on stabilization, learning pacing, self-soothing, and safety planning before processing painful memories. Resist the cultural pressure to just talk about it without a regulation foundation. Processing without safety amplifies re-traumatization. EMDR and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral modalities are evidence-based tools that reduce the charge around memories while preserving factual learning. Create predictable social anchors. Isolation magnifies vulnerability. Identify 2 or 3 safe people who practice calm, non-judgmental listening. These relationships are repair environments where you can practice new responses at low cost. Communicate small requests. If I seem anxious after that meeting, can you check on me in a text? Concrete micro-support reduces the risk of reactivity spirals. Avoid using new relationships as therapy. Instead, pair them with professional support so you build resilience across domains. Set realistic pacing. Nervous system healing is not linear. Expect 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Celebrate micro wins. You asked for a boundary and it held for an hour. You noticed panic and breathed through it without pinging the person who triggered you. Track transitions in a journal to see progress that your emotional memory will minimize. Use simple metrics. Days in a row, you completed a grounding practice. sleep hours averaged, or number of times you used a script successfully. Data reduces catastrophizing and provides objective encouragement. Regulate digital exposure strategically. Toxic interactions often amplify through screens. Implement decision windows. Set specific hours to check messages and avoid reactive midnight scrolling. Use tools like Do Not Disturb, delayed email sending, and message batching. When a charged message arrives, force a 30-minute pause during which you do a grounding routine before responding. That delay breaks conditioned impulsive reactions and often changes the tone of your reply. If the person is a recurring source of distress, mute or archive them temporarily while you rebuild coping capacity. Nutrition matters for neurochemistry. Blood sugar dips amplify anxiety and reduce cognitive control. Small, frequent meals with protein and fiber, hydration, and limiting stimulants like excess caffeine stabilize mood. Alcohol is a short-term anesthetic that fragments sleep and elevates reactivity later. Use caution during early recovery. Consider consulting a nutrition professional if you notice severe mood fluctuations linked to diet. Reframe setbacks as information, not failure. If you respond emotionally to a provocation and later regret it, analyze the sequence like a detective. What was the trigger? What body sensations preceded the reaction? What assumption escalated the feeling? And what intervention could redirect next time? Build a short corrective ritual, apology if needed, a note to yourself about the trigger, and one immediate physiological reset. This keeps learning fast and shame slow. Finally, integrate rituals of restoration, weekly nature walks, creative expression, or volunteering, activities that refill rather than demand. Pleasure is therapeutic because it retrains reward pathways to associate joy with safety instead of vigilance. Schedule restoration as non-negotiable, a maintenance budget for your nervous system that protects long-term recovery. Healing the nervous system after toxic exposure takes time, intention, and practical tools. It is a somatic project as much as a cognitive one. Start with breath, structure the day to reduce unpredictability, invest in relational anchors and professional support, and treat slips as data. Over months of consistent micro-practices, your baseline shifts from survival to presence, and from there you can make clearer decisions about relationships, work, and identity. Chapter 5. Rebuilding trust and finding healthy relationships. When someone has lived inside manipulative dynamics, the idea of trusting another person can feel like standing on ice. Who can be counted on? How do you know when someone is safe? Rebuilding trust after toxicity is not a blink and it's done exercise. It is an intentional apprenticeship in calibration, learning to distinguish healthy signals from familiar illusions, and to grow relationship muscles that support mutuality, accountability, and joy. This chapter gives you the cognitive map and practical steps to evaluate, repair, or replace relationships with clarity. Begin with clarity on repairability. Not every relationship deserves restoration. Ask 3 concrete questions. Does the other person acknowledge harm when shown evidence? Do they accept responsibility without shifting blame? Are they willing to participate in a mutually agreed plan to change behavior that includes measurable actions and accountability? If you answer yes to all 3, repair is possible. If not, your energy is better invested elsewhere because repeated apologies without behavior change are emotional drain dressed as hope. Define trust operationally. Trust is not a feeling. It is a sequence of predictable actions. Think in terms of micro-contracts, small, specific promises that can be tested quickly and safely. For example, a partner agrees to respond to scheduling conflicts by offering 2 alternate times within 24 hours. A colleague agrees to CC you on client emails. These micro-contracts are statements about predictability. When they are kept consistently over weeks or months, trust accrues. When they are violated, trust decays. Track the micro-contracts and treat them like the data they are. Communication is the repair tool, but not without structure. Use clear protocols for difficult conversations. Set an agenda. Agree on a time when both parties are calm. Limit the session to one topic and conclude with a specific next step. Avoid open-ended, "we need to talk" setups because they trigger defensiveness. Use I statements with concrete examples and linked outcomes. When X happened, I felt Y. The result was Z. Can we agree on how to handle Y next time? This reduces ambiguity and centers the conversation on outcomes rather than identity. Boundaries become relational instruments, not punishments. Reframe them as minimum operating standards. I can't continue a conversation when you raise your voice. I will step away and return when we can speak calmly. This gives the other party the option to repair and prevents endless escalation. Consistency is critical. If you announce a consequence and do not follow through, boundaries lose credibility. If you follow through without cruelty, you teach others how to treat you. Slow trust building is strategic. Micro-dating for dating contexts or micro-trust experiments in work contexts reduce risk. For romantic relationships, limit financial entanglements and shared living until consistent actions have been demonstrated over time. In friendships, test reliability with small favors before sharing deep vulnerabilities. In professional partnerships, pilot projects with clear KPIs are better than blind equity or responsibility transfers. Slow trust protects against the all-too-common rush into familiarity that toxic patterns rely upon. Learn to read red flags as information, not drama. Red flags include persistent boundary testing, refusal to take responsibility, frequent gaslighting, and verbal or emotional escalation in response to minor disappointments. If a pattern emerges, address it early with a micro-contract and a timeline for change. If no change occurs, accept that the relationship may be non-viable for long-term safety. Distinguish between one-off errors and sustained patterns. The latter are actionable data. Cultivate a portfolio of relational safety. Don't rely on one person to supply all emotional needs. Diversify: mentors who advise, friends who listen, colleagues who collaborate, and professionals who support clinical needs. This reduces pressure on any single relationship and provides perspective when one interaction triggers old wounds. Community buffers are also protective. Join groups aligned with values, volunteer networks, hobby collectives, or learning cohorts where trust can be built gradually in low-stakes environments. Practice transparent forgiveness if appropriate. Forgiveness is not forgetting, nor is it granting permission to continue harming. It is a pragmatic release intended to free you from the repeated mental rehearsal of past injuries. When the offender demonstrates measurable change, a calibrated forgiveness ritual, an explicit acknowledgement, a documented plan, and a time frame can convert repair into renewed mutuality. If change is absent, forgiveness becomes internal and unconditional. You choose peace without re-engagement. Use professional support for complex relationships, especially family ties with shared history. Family dynamics often bind people to toxic roles. Therapists can help create structure for difficult transitions, mediated conversations, and practical separation terms. Family law attorneys or financial planners may be necessary where assets, custody, or shared obligations are involved. Finally, steward the new relational ecosystem. Celebrate dependencies that are healthy, people who show up and help without draining you. Reinvest energy into relationships that return reciprocity and care. Continue personal practices that maintain clarity. regular check-ins with a therapist, maintaining sleep and nutrition, and continuing somatic routines so your nervous system stays regulated during ongoing relational experiments. Rebuilding trust is an iterative craft. It is practiced through small agreements kept over time, through clear communication and measurable change, and through a willingness to leave what is unsafe behind. When you rebuild your relational life with intention, you discover relationships that not only feel safer, but allow you to show up fully, the person you are becoming, rather than the one you were surviving as. Chapter 6. Financial and legal safety. Concrete steps to protect your life. Money and legal arrangements are often the invisible levers that trap people in toxic situations. Practical safety begins with planning and documentation. This chapter gives a tactical step-by-step playbook you can use whether you are slowly creating independence or preparing for an urgent exit. The focus is pragmatic, low drama, high leverage, and doable even under pressure. Start with a private inventory. List every account, asset, debt, and recurring obligation tied to the toxic relationship. Include bank accounts, credit cards, investments, pensions, rental or mortgage documents, insurance policies, vehicle titles, business ownership records, and any shared subscriptions. Note access methods, online credentials, physical keys, authorized signers. Keep this inventory in two formats: a secure digital file, encrypted, password protected, and a hard copy stored with a trusted support person. This step turns guesswork into a map. Create financial independence quietly. If you currently lack a personal bank account, open one in your name only. Many countries offer simple, low-barrier accounts with minimal ID requirements. If opening an account in your own name is risky, consider a small emergency stash of cash hidden safely, or ask a trusted friend to hold a sealed envelope until you need it. Gradual small savings add up and provide psychological leverage. Automate even tiny transfers to your savings, so progress doesn't depend on willpower. Secure essential documents. Make copies of IDs, birth certificates, social security or national insurance numbers, vehicle registrations, marriage certificates, and any paperwork related to children. If possible, scan these documents and store them in an encrypted cloud folder or password manager entry. If that's not safe, leave physical copies with a lawyer, advocate, or trusted friend. Having documents accessible prevents delays later when bureaucratic hurdles are exploited. Establish an emergency fund and budget for exit costs. Practical exit planning includes a defensible estimate: lodging, transport, legal fees, childcare, and short-term living costs. Aim for a modest reserve that covers a month or two of basic needs as a baseline. If immediate large reserves are impossible, build a staged plan. First cover travel, then temporary accommodation, then initial legal fees. Local domestic violence or community organizations can advise on realistic figures for your region. Protect your finances digitally. Change passwords on accounts you control and enable two-factor authentication. If shared passwords exist, transition credentials discreetly where possible and document the change. Beware of devices that the other person can monitor. Consider accessing accounts from a library or friend's device if your phone or computer is monitored. Use a password manager and a secure recovery method that the other party cannot access. Address joint accounts and debts carefully. Joint bank or credit card accounts can be a source of coercion. If you can, open independent accounts and direct your income there. For shared debts, document amounts and payment history. If the other party controls accounts, keep careful written records and copies of statements as evidence of financial abuse. Consult a financial counselor who understands coercive control for strategies appropriate to your legal jurisdiction. Legal advice matters early. A consultation with a family law attorney or legal aid clinic clarifies options like restraining orders, custody considerations, protective orders, and how assets are treated in your jurisdiction. Many lawyers offer an initial low-cost consultation or pro bono services through local domestic violence shelters. Early advice helps you avoid costly mistakes like transferring assets without counsel or signing documents that waive your rights. Use formal documentation for agreements. When possible, reduce verbal understandings to written agreements with timestamps. Email follow-ups after important conversations, create evidence, and reduce later denials. For workplace or shared housing disputes, send brief, polite recaps. Per our conversation today, you will handle X by Y date. Keep copies and do not engage in long disputes via public channels. Condense facts into short confirmations. Consider temporary protective measures. If there is immediate danger, local law enforcement, shelters, or crisis hotlines can provide emergency protection and advise on safety planning. Ask about protective orders and the process to obtain them. If violence is likely, prioritize physical safety over asset preservation. Get to a safe place, and then pursue legal and financial remedies. Plan for children's safety and custody paperwork. If children are involved, organize medical records, school information, and basic custody documents. Consult a family lawyer or advocacy organization that can advise on temporary custody arrangements, supervised exchange options, and how courts in your area assess parental stability. Keep structured logs of interactions that threaten safety, dates, times, witnesses, and concrete events, because courts often rely on documented patterns. Privacy and digital footprint management are part of legal safety. Review social media privacy settings and untag yourself from images that reveal location or plans. Turn off geotagging and be cautious sharing travel information. If you fear surveillance, create a new email address and phone number for critical communications and keep them limited to trusted contacts and legal resources. If shared property or businesses are involved, document everything. Keep records of contributions, payroll, invoices, and contracts. Small discrepancies add up. A forensic account of how money flowed can be decisive in legal proceedings. If you are a business co-owner, consult specialized legal counsel to explore temporary managerial protections or buy-sell options. Create a network of professionals. A small team, lawyer, financial counselor, therapist, and a trusted friend or mentor, forms the backbone of practical safety. Each brings a domain of expertise and can coordinate timing, legal steps matched to financial moves, and emotional readiness. Ask for referrals from local support organizations. They often provide vetted lists of trauma-informed professionals. Practice low-conflict communications. Use short factual messages rather than emotional exchanges when dealing with the toxic person. If you must negotiate, use neutral language and stick to the contract or agreed roadmap. Avoid long justifications or emotional pleas that can be weaponized later. When necessary, conduct negotiations through your lawyer or a mediator who can reduce opportunities for manipulation. Document harassment and threats. Keep dated records of abusive messages, voicemails, texts, and emails. Screenshots are useful, but also preserve original files when possible. If there are threats of harm, report them to law enforcement and request a formal incident number. That paper trail supports legal actions and helps professionals contextualize behavior patterns. Finally, test your plan in low-stakes ways. Do a practice run. Pack a small bag, gather documents, arrange temporary transport, and test a secrecy plan with a friend. Small rehearsals reduce panic and increase confidence if an emergency arises. Financial and legal safety grows with preparation. Each step you take, no matter how small, adds practical options and reduces the toxic person's ability to corner you through control of resources. Chapter 7. Reclaiming your voice and power. Practical practices to rebuild identity. After safety and stability begin, the deeper work is reclaiming your agency. This chapter centers on concrete practices that regenerate voice, choices, and a coherent self, not as therapy platitudes, but as daily skills you can practice and measure. The aim is rebuilding a life that is internally chosen rather than externally coerced. Begin with a short identity audit. Ask 4 questions and answer them in writing. What do I value most right now? What did I used to love that I stopped doing? What do I avoid because it's hard? What small competence could I practice this week? The audit is not a crisis checklist. It's a way to find warm spots of meaningful effort. Choose one small competence, cooking one healthy meal, returning a networking email, or taking a 30-minute walk, and commit to it for 7 days. Competence accumulates into confidence. Narrative reframing is a daily discipline. Toxic interactions erode the story you tell about yourself. Reauthoring begins by creating a short personal statement. 2 sentences describing who you are and what matters. Put it somewhere visible and read it each morning. When old scripts, "I always fail," "I don't deserve care," surface, counter them with factual rebuttals. "I completed X despite Y. I sought help and that was courageous." This practice is not magical. It is cognitive retraining that builds a new default narrative. Practice micro-decisions to reclaim autonomy. Every day take 3 small decisions you used to defer to the toxic person. Choose what to eat, what time to exercise, or which meeting to accept. These micro-assertions retrain your decision pathways. Journal each choice and note how it felt. Even neutral choices rebuild the muscle of agency. Rebuild pleasure and safety through somatic rituals. Return to practices that calm your body, consistent sleep, movement you enjoy, and small sensory comforts. Schedule one predictable pleasure each week, a warm bath, a favorite playlist, or a Sunday walk. Pleasure isn't indulgence. It signals to your nervous system that the world can be safe again. Set a learning goal tied to identity and future options. Choose a skill that enhances independence. Basic financial literacy, negotiation, public speaking, coding, or a professional certification. Break it into 20-minute blocks and schedule them. Learning rebuilds competence and creates optionality, which lowers the psychological power of any single relationship. Rebuild social scaffolding intentionally. Identify 3 categories of relationships to cultivate. 1 friend for emotional processing, 1 colleague or mentor for career perspective, and 1 community group for shared activity. Show up for low-stakes commitments initially. Coffee, a course, a volunteer slot. Reciprocity builds slowly. Small, consistent presence lays the groundwork for deeper trust. Practice assertive communication daily. Use I statements and clear requests. A short script helps. State the observation, express your need, propose a boundary. For example, when meetings run over, I fall behind on client work. I need us to end on time. Can we agree to a 45-minute limit? Role-play this script with a coach or friend until it feels ordinary. The key is repetition. The muscle grows when used under safe practice. Create a growth ritual around failure. Fear of failure often returns after toxic experiences. Reframe setbacks as experiments. Name the hypothesis. Run a small test. Measure outcomes. Adjust. Keep a failure log where you record one thing that didn't work and one insight gained. Over time, the log shows forward motion even when outcomes aren't perfect. Develop a boundary maintenance plan. Boundaries require maintenance like fences do. Schedule weekly reviews. Which boundaries held, which didn't, and why. Adjust scripts and safety measures accordingly. Recognize that boundary enforcement sometimes requires external supports, legal advice, workplace HR, or a trusted friend to stand by you. Integrate therapy and coaching into an action plan. Therapy aids processing and regulation. Coaching translates growth into practical steps and accountability. Use therapy for deep emotional work and coaching for skill acquisition. A combined approach accelerates repair without sacrificing action. Engage in values-based projects. Choose an action that aligns with your values and contributes to something beyond yourself. Mentoring, community work, or a small creative project. Values projects reconnect you to meaning and shift energy from survival to contribution. They also provide opportunities to meet people aligned with your emerging identity. Finally, practice compassion with boundaries. Reclaiming power is not about becoming hard and unfeeling. It's about clear standards held with gentleness. When you encounter setbacks, treat yourself as you would a friend, factual, firm, and kind. Over time, the daily practices of small choices, clear scripts, and consistent learning transform vulnerability into durable agency. Rebuilding your voice is not a single speech. It is a life lived in alignment, step by deliberate step. Chapter 8. Choosing and cultivating safe relationships. By the time you reach this chapter, you have learned to see toxic patterns, set boundaries, protect your finances and legal footing, and begin the slow work of nervous system repair. Now the question becomes practical and forward-looking. How do you choose people who help you flourish? And how do you cultivate relationships that stay healthy over time? This chapter is a manual for building a relational ecosystem that supports the person you are becoming. Practical criteria, concrete habits, and small rituals that preserve safety while inviting connection. First, adopt a simple decision frame for new relationships. Observe, test, commit. Observation is slow and intentional. Watch how the person treats other people, how they respond under mild stress, and whether their words match small actions. Testing transforms hope into data. Give low-stakes requests and notice the response. Ask for a minor favor, set a short agreement, or suggest a small compromise. Commitment comes only after repeated evidence of reliability. This three-step posture prevents the common trap of leaning in emotionally before the other party has earned reciprocal investment. Create an evidence checklist you use quietly over the first 3 months of a new relationship. It should have 4 items, and you should score them after 3 interactions. Reliability, keeps small promises. Respect, asks, listens, doesn't interrupt or gaslight. Reciprocity, gives as much as they take. And safety, you don't feel drained, diminished, or constantly on edge. If 3 of 4 scores are consistently positive, the relationship merits further investment. If 2 or fewer are positive, pause and either adjust expectations or disengage gently. This rubric removes guesswork and brings values into plain view. Cultivating safety requires daily micro-practices. Start with the 2-check rule. Before you disclose anything personal beyond surface facts, check twice. First, does this person have a track record of discretion and empathy? Second, is this information necessary right now, or are you seeking validation? The 2-check rule reduces oversharing and the vulnerability it can create with someone untested. Pair that with the boundary rehearsal technique. Before a challenging interaction, run a 1-minute mental script of what you will say and how you will end the conversation if necessary. Preparation reduces reactivity and increases clarity. Communication routines anchor healthy relationships. Adopt 3 habits that are small but transformative. Habit 1. weekly check-ins. If you care about someone, friend, partner, or collaborator, schedule a short regular check-in that is explicitly about process, not drama. How are we doing with time, expectations, and support? Habit 2. The brief apology plus repair script. When you make a mistake, say, "I'm sorry. Here's what I'll do to fix this." Then follow through. Habit 3. Gratitude rituals. A simple, specific thank you text or note after a helpful conversation signals appreciation and reinforces positive patterns. Learn the language of negotiated expectations. Most breakdowns happen because people assume shared meanings. Make agreements explicit and brief. Use templates. For example, when starting a new collaborative project, send a one-paragraph summary. "We agreed that I will handle X by date Y and you will handle Z by date Y. If either of us needs to change, we'll notify the other within 24 hours. That email or message functions as a contract and reduces future gaslighting or shifting of the story. In personal relationships, similar short protocols about money, time together, or parenting prevent slow erosion. Cultivate relationships that expand your life rather than replicate old dysfunctions. One practical test. Does the relationship increase your options? If being with someone narrows your choices, fewer friends, less time for growth, constant guilt, treat it as a red flag. Positive relationships add resources. They connect you to new networks, introduce healthy habits, or enable rest and creativity. Keep a mental tally of ways each close relationship increases or decreases your options. Aim to optimize for expansion. Repair is an inevitable part of long-term relationships. The test is not whether problems occur, but whether you both have repair protocols. Agree in advance on the mechanics of repair, a time limit for cooling off, a mediator if needed, a way to reset the clock. For instance, couples might agree to a 24-hour cool-off and a shared callback time where each partner speaks for 2 uninterrupted minutes about what they felt. Teams can adopt post-mortem rituals with documented action items. Repair systems convert conflict into growth rather than chronic damage. Boundaries must evolve as trust deepens. Early boundaries are rigid for protection. Later boundaries can be more nuanced and negotiated. Practice the boundary audit quarterly. List 3 boundaries that held, 2 that failed, and 1 you will adjust. This keeps your standards dynamic and prevents either brittle isolation or careless reopening of old wounds. And remember, adjusting a boundary is not the same as abandoning it. It is a conscious choice that should be reversible and documented if the relationship is high stakes. Invest in communities that model the values you seek. Groups, volunteer organizations, classes, professional networks are low-risk environments to practice trust and observe others' behavior. They also distribute relational labor. No single person bears the weight of your emotional life. Make a small rule. In any new community, don't take on more than 10% of leadership time in the first year. This prevents burnout and exposure to dynamics before you've learned the culture. Teach your children, if you have them, simple relational literacy, naming feelings, asking for help, and noticing when a friend makes them feel small. Children who learn this language early are less likely to internalize toxic dynamics. If you don't have children, teach yourself the same protocols through daily journaling and role modeling. The quieter you can make your emotional environment, the faster your nervous system heals. Finally, cultivate the capacity to exit with dignity. Healthy relationships do not fear endings. They plan for them. Have an exit checklist. Preserve documents. Detach shared accounts. Neutralize joint obligations. And practice a minimal script for departure that is calm and factual. Exiting is not always dramatic. Often it is procedural and compassionate. Treat endings as a form of self-care when remaining is incompatible with your well-being. Choosing and cultivating safe relationships is less about perfection and more about intention. Use observation instead of hope, structured agreements instead of assumptions, and tiny rituals instead of grand gestures. Build an ecosystem where people increase your options, respect your boundaries, and participate in repair when needed. In that environment, connection becomes nourishment again rather than a source of ongoing depletion. Practice these habits daily, audit quarterly, and remember, the goal is not to be alone, but to be aligned with others, with your values, and with the life you are rebuilding. Chapter 9. When leaving becomes the only safe option, a practical exit blueprint. There comes a threshold in some relationships when survival requires action, not more patience. This chapter is about that threshold, how to decide, plan, and execute an exit with care and strategy so you do not exchange one kind of harm for another. Leaving is rarely dramatic in real life. It is a sequence of practical moves, emotional preparation, and contingency planning. Treat an exit like a project. Define objectives, list constraints, build steps, test assumptions, and execute with discretion. First, name the threshold clearly for yourself. Notice patterns rather than single events, repeated boundary violations, escalating controlling behaviors, financial coercion, or threats to physical safety. Ask concrete questions. Has my autonomy been repeatedly undermined? Do I fear for my safety or that of children? Have I tried reasonable repair steps and seen no measurable change in weeks or months? If the answer to any of these is yes, staying is an unsafe default. Naming the reasons removes shame and gives you moral clarity. You are not abandoning love. You are choosing survival. Next, define the minimum viable exit. What outcome do you need to be safe in the short term? For many people, that means a temporary place to sleep, access to funds, and safe documents. For others, it means legal protection, custody arrangements, or a public communications plan. Make a short list of essentials and rank them by feasibility and urgency. This list becomes the backbone of your logistics so that emotional pressure cannot move the goalposts. Document everything methodically. Create a private folder, physical and encrypted digital, with IDs, financial statements, proof of abuse or manipulation, dated messages, voicemails, photographs, legal documents, and contact lists. Keep duplicates in at least 2 secure locations, a trusted friend's house, and an encrypted cloud drive. If your devices are monitored, access these documents from a safe machine like a library computer or a friend's phone. Documentation is power because it short-circuits later denials and strengthens legal options. Secure financial independence incrementally and discreetly. If you can open an individual account, do so. If not, save cash in small amounts or use a trusted confidant. Divert a tiny percentage of regular income automatically into a separate account if possible. If shared accounts exist, gather statements quietly so you know balances and obligations. Consult a financial counselor who understands coercive dynamics to learn how to separate credit responsibilities without triggering immediate retaliation. Even modest savings provide strategic leverage. Build a trusted circle with role clarity. Choose 1 or 2 people for immediate logistical help, another person for childcare backup if needed, and a legal contact for advice. Tell them only what they need to know for their role. Keep messages short and factual. Use code words if necessary. The goal is to reduce confusion and build a set of people who can act quickly. Practice a simple exit script with your circle. Who will call a taxi? Who will take children? Who will hold documents? Who will provide overnight shelter? Plan the physical departure with timing in mind. Avoid announcing plans. Instead, create windows when the exit is least likely to be chaotic. when the toxic person is away, during a work trip, or early morning when fewer people are around. Arrange transportation in advance. Pack and go bag with essentials, IDs, medications, a small amount of cash, chargers, copies of critical documents, and a change of clothes. Leave the bag with a safe person if you cannot keep it at home. Small rehearsals reduce panic and increase confidence. Legal preparation is non-negotiable when risks include stalking, custody disputes, or financial claims. Consult an attorney early to understand protective orders, temporary custody, and asset freeze options. Many jurisdictions offer emergency orders that can be issued quickly. Knowing the process reduces paralysis. If legal help is unaffordable, reach out to local support organizations. Many provide referrals, pro bono clinics, and court accompaniment. Remember the golden rule. Do not sign anything that relinquishes custody or assets without legal counsel. Communicate minimally and with strategy. Post-exit messages are not a place for moral essays. Keep communications factual, short, and future-focused. I have left. For safety, do not contact me. All further communication will go through my lawyer. Public platforms are rarely safe. Avoid social media announcements until you have legal advice and a safety plan. If children are involved, create a neutral custody message and follow agreed channels for exchange to reduce conflict. Post-exit emotional triage matters. Immediately after leaving, your nervous system will oscillate between relief and intense fear. Expect this and plan interventions: a grounding walk, a short call with a trusted support, a scheduled therapy appointment within the week. Rely on somatic tools, breath, grounding, to manage acute panic. Allow yourself to feel the complexity, relief, grief, guilt, without letting these feelings dictate impulsive returns. Feelings are data, not directives. Practical transition steps take time. Change locks, update account passwords, notify employers if safety at work could be compromised, and inform relevant institutions, schools, healthcare providers, of temporary changes. If the toxic person has access to shared digital assets, do a security audit. Change email recovery options, enable two-factor authentication, and separate shared accounts. Small technical protections are powerful shields. Chapter 10. Sustaining recovery and building a life that lasts. Recovery from toxic relationships is not a finish line you cross once. It is a landscape you learn to navigate for the rest of your life. This chapter focuses on practical systems and mindsets that keep you safe, sane, and moving toward flourishing, rather than merely surviving. The goal is durability, rituals, structures, and decisions that reduce the chance of slipping back into old dynamics and increase the probability that your life will expand in freedom, meaning, and connection. Start with the assumption that vulnerability remains, but it need not be a liability. Your nervous system will remember patterns long after the immediate situation ends. That memory is useful because it keeps you cautious. It becomes harmful when it keeps you closed. The task is to convert that vigilance into wise precaution rather than chronic fear. Do this by creating predictable scaffolding around the moments when vulnerability peaks: holidays, anniversaries, high-stress work periods, or personal losses. Anticipate these times and schedule compensatory supports, extra therapy sessions, time with trusted friends, brief digital fasts, or a temporary rule to avoid thorny topics. Preparation reduces reactivity. Design a two-layer safety plan, one for immediate dips and one for long-term resilience. Immediate dip tools are quick actions you can take when triggers hit: breathing sequences, a short walk, a call to a designated anchor person, a grounding technique, or a pre-agreed script that ends a conversation without explanation. Long-term resilience is built from habits, sleep consistency, a weekly movement practice, a financial buffer, ongoing therapy or coaching, and a social rhythm that includes at least one person who knows your history and will hold you accountable. Think of immediate tools as fire extinguishers and long-term habits as the building code that makes fires less likely. Financial autonomy remains a central pillar of sustained safety. Continue to steward money as a boundary, even after you feel stable. Maintain separate accounts, quarterly reviews of shared obligations, and an emergency reserve that is untouchable except for real crises. If you left a toxic relationship without full financial independence, treat the early years as a period for rebuilding liquidity and credit, using modest, measurable goals. 3 months expenses in a reserve, then 6, and then a year. Financial predictability reduces pressure and narrows the opportunities for others to weaponize scarcity. Cultivate an adaptable boundary framework rather than fixed lists that feel punitive. Boundaries must evolve with your life stage and relationships. Create a short protocol for boundary negotiation. State the need clearly. Propose the consequence you will implement if the boundary is violated. Agree on a review timeline and follow through consistently. Share this protocol with trusted friends or a therapist for feedback before you deploy it in emotionally charged environments. Consistency builds credibility. Random enforcement undermines it. Relapse is not moral failure. It is an expected signal that a system needs adjustment. If you find yourself slipping back into old patterns, apologizing when you know you were not wrong, taking responsibility for another's mood, or tolerating small cruelties, treat it like a troubleshooting problem. Use a short diagnostic. What sequence led here? What stressors were present? Which boundary failed? And what support was missing? Then enact a micro plan. One specific behavior to change for the next week, one person to check in with daily, and one reinforcing ritual. A morning declaration, a weekly walk with a friend. Rapid iteration prevents small slips from becoming collapse. Invest intentionally in relationships that multiply your resilience. Quality beats quantity. Seek people who demonstrate 3 practical virtues. Reliability, they keep micro-promises. Curiosity, they listen without judgment. And reciprocity, they give and receive. Create a portfolio of support. An emotional confidant, a practical helper, someone who can assist with errands or logistics. A professional advisor, therapist, lawyer, financial planner, and a community of peers who share comparable values, book clubs, classes, volunteer groups. Spread dependency so no single person becomes the axis of your safety. Work and purpose are stabilizing anchors when designed intentionally. If your job still places you in toxic loops, create escape valves, clear communication protocols, boundaries on off-hours contact, and documented handoffs. If your work supports your recovery through autonomy, meaning, or decent hours, lean into it as a source of identity that is not tied to pain. Consider slow pivots if needed. Small skills built through night classes, short consulting gigs that expand networks, or a side project that increases optionality. Purposeful work increases the quality of your choices and reduces the gravitational pull of unhealthy relationships. Practice the ritual of quarterly life audits. On 4 dates each year, spend a focused 2 hours reviewing the last 3 months, which boundaries held, which relationships expanded or contracted your options, what stressors were primary, and where your money and time went. Create one target for the next quarter: more sleep, deeper friendships, debt reduction, or learning a new skill, and assign measurable steps. These audits create a feedback loop that transforms vague hope into concrete progress, and keeps you accountable without shame. Teach what you have learned. There is enormous healing in translating experience into help for others. Mentorship, formal or informal, reinforces your lessons and turns suffering into meaningful contribution. Volunteer with organizations that support people exiting harmful relationships. Lead a small workshop on boundary setting, or simply hold a weekly check-in for a friend who is struggling. Teaching clarifies and stabilizes knowledge. It also expands your social capital in values-aligned spaces. Prioritize legal and estate hygiene as part of long-term care. Review wills, beneficiaries, and access privileges periodically. Ensure your devices, accounts, and documents remain organized and shared as appropriate with trusted executors. Small administrative tidying prevents future crises and preserves autonomy for decades. Guard against the double trap of isolation and overexposure. Isolation protects from immediate harms, but starves growth. Overexposure risks re-traumatization. Use the observation test commit pattern for new relationships. Watch behavior, give small tests of reliability, and commit when evidence accumulates. Allow intimacy to build in measurable steps, rather than leaps of faith. Finally, cultivate a narrative of identity that is generous and practical. Replace internal scripts of shame with an orientation toward competency. I respond, I learn, I repair, I grow. Keep a short list of non-negotiables, core values that guide decisions when life gets noisy, and revisit them in your quarterly audits. Over years, these daily decisions compound into a life that is coherent and resistant to manipulation. Recovery is not about sealing yourself off from the world. It's about entering the world with discernment, rituals, and allies that amplify your capacity to choose freely. Sustain the small habits that regulate your nervous system. Protect your autonomy through financial and legal clarity. Build relationships that expand options, and iterate rapidly when the system shows stress. With steady attention, you do more than survive. You build a life that generously supports the person you are becoming. Conclusion: from survival to sovereignty. The arc of healing after toxic relationships moves from naming harm to building systems that prevent harm from defining you again. Each chapter in this journey contributes a different tool: recognition, boundaries, safety, nervous system repair, legal and financial planning, social architecture, and long-term thriving. None of these are one-time fixes. They are practices, rituals, and decisions repeated until they form identity. Sovereignty is not control over every external event. It is the quiet power to choose response over reflex, to rebuild slowly, and to protect what matters. The practice of sovereignty is ordinary: morning routines kept, small promises honored, difficult conversations held with clarity, and repairs made without drama. Over time, those ordinary practices accumulate into a life that is no longer hostage to someone else's chaos. Keep the map, but stay gentle with the pace. Change is steady, sometimes glacial, often non-linear. Celebrate measurable steps and treat setbacks as signals to refine your system. Surround yourself with people and professionals who hold your dignity. Protect your time and resources. Teach what you learn. And above all, remember this: surviving was never the end goal. Becoming whole and free was.